Well, welcome everyone to our first Cohort 2 meeting in 2026. Can you believe that you've been at this for half a year? I bet you all feel like pros, don't you? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Um, well, welcome. We have an exciting agenda today. We have our partners from the early learning team, Michelle Belanger and Marcy Whitcomb, here to share information about supporting children in early childhood classrooms. And so I'm going to turn it over to them. We will have time at the end for questions and answers. Um, if you have any questions from the content today or any questions in general, we have our whole team here to help support you. So I will turn it over to our presenters.
Sandy, thank you. All right. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for this discussion. It was a lot of fun working on this and thinking about it through the lens of everyone that's here today. So my name is Michelle Belanger, and I am the pre-K partnership specialist on the early learning team. So I support SAUs and community partners in partnering for public pre-K programming. So classrooms that are in community-based settings. And Marcy?
Thank you. My name is Marcy Whitcomb. I'm the public pre-K consultant here on the early learning team at the DOE. In my role, I work closely with public pre-K educators and in partnership classrooms and administrators. I do classroom visits using a specific observation tool looking at high quality interactions in classroom environments and support educators in resources, guidance, and administrators in resources and guidance as well. And then sort of an understanding of Chapter 124.
So we're just going to give a little background, a little bit, child development 101. So early intervention for children birth through age 5 is really important. About 80% of a child's brain growth is in that first 5 years. So any supports and services that we can offer to support delays or disabilities within that child is really important as that brain is developing. And really the goal is the sooner you can get a child earlier supports and intervention, the earlier they are hopefully to transition out of need-in services later. And then also just a little bit in general about the mixed delivery system and the advantages. I know that the transition team has talked quite a bit about mixed delivery and really taking advantage of the programs that are already existing in your areas. So the Child Care Choices website is on the slide, and you will be getting a copy of the slides. And that will help you identify licensed child care centers that are in your area. And so the mixed delivery system is a partnership of SAUs, child care centers, family child care programs, Head Start programs, and other community-based organizations all really make up the mixed delivery system. And so it makes it up for public pre-K programming, for the FAPE transition, and the benefits of really taking advantage of the programs that are in your area. You know, it helps because a lot of these programs are open year round and are able to support working families. And some of those children have been in their care since they might have been infants. So it really does help with that continuity of care. It also ensures that the least restrictive environment, because these programs will typically have various ages, and will have typically develop in peers of similar age. And then offering children high quality experiences and opportunities for growth and development in the early years is really important, and something that these centers do on a daily basis for children of all ages. And so on that Child Care Choices website, you can filter them out by the star 3, which is the requirement for partnering. And just to give you a little bit more information about the star 3 requirement, a child in early care and education center that has a star 3 rating or higher, they already have certain standards that they need to meet, and that are looked at by OCFS. They have somebody that will go out to the centers to do site visits and go over their portfolio to make sure that they are meeting these star 3 requirements. And it also has standards for the teaching staff, the administrative staff. It has requirements for the Rising Stars Inclusive Practices checklist that they need to fill out, which helps them look at how their program is inclusive of all children. Also, just so you know, that the star rating does go up to a star 5. Star 5 is usually related with national accreditation, but also all of the Head Starts in our state are required to be a level 5, and that means a star 5. And so that means they are all accredited and considered the highest quality for the state.
So after a little background and all of the things that we know a little bit about and now a little bit more, one of the caveats I want to give you guys today is that our slides that we prepared are very word heavy. We did that on purpose because we know that once we leave here today, even though there is a recording, a lot of the things that we wanted to say, we wanted to have on the slide, so you kind of had at your fingertips if you want to share it with your educators or partners or school boards or anybody else that you want to share it with. A lot of information is on the slides. I'm not going to read everything that's on there, but we are definitely going to talk about it. So the first thing we're going to look at when we talk about how to support children with IEPs and 3-year-olds with IEPs in our gen ed pre-K classrooms is universal design learning. What that means is that we're creating inclusive environments through different materials, differentiating activities, different curriculum choices, how we teach our teaching strategies, and then using child assessments as well. Using universal designed learning means that we're recognizing that children learn in very diverse and different ways. They're learning, they're also developing, not just academically, but we're looking at, physical development, cognitive development, social emotional development, all of the different things across the domains that we look at when we look at the MELDs, which we'll talk about later. And so the UDL framework really includes these 3 bolded areas, which is multiple means of engagement. We're looking at different methods of, different activities, including hands-on activities, including, interactions and high quality questions to sort of understand how children are thinking. So we're asking the what, why, how, what would you do if, I noticed that, those sort of things. Singing, dancing, a whole bunch of different modalities. We're also looking at multiple means of representation. So how are we representing the concepts and the curriculum that we are introducing to children, knowing that some of us are visual learners, some of us need hands-on. Real life materials are very important. Materials from nature are really important. And those are just different ways of bringing concepts to children that might understand them differently. And then also allowing children multiple means of expression. So giving them opportunities and different ways of expressing themselves when they're interacting with materials and when they're completing activities and tasks. So some of the things that we look at when we're bringing universally designed learning into the classroom, or the outcomes that we're looking for, is that UDL ensures that all children have access to materials, activities, and learning. So accessibility in the classroom is very important. I am going to show you some photos in just a moment, sort of what that looks like. Using visual tools in the classroom, that's just another support for children and adults. It can be if you have a substitute in your classroom, that sort of thing. Showing them, the classroom routine, the classroom expectations, labeling what goes where. Again, I have some photos. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Giving appropriate choices and giving them often, letting children sort of think through what they need, what they would like, but giving them appropriate choices, which generally for a 3 to 4-year-old would mean 2 to 3, possibly 4 different options, but letting them choose in an appropriate way, meaning that the options that you're giving them, you are being intentional about, but also giving them choice and voice. Definitely individualizes children's learning and participation in activities and during the day. We're offering multiple play and learning centers with learning objectives, and letting children know what those objectives are is very, very important. There's a lot of research on children learning through play. So having that sort of guided play where we are setting out very intentional materials and we are differentiating between children's developmental levels, but letting them have free play, remembering that we're empowering the process of learning and developing over the product that children, the end product. And then we're also giving careful consideration of potential roadblocks for children's development and learning, and then working really hard to remove those roadblocks. A couple of the really important things to remember is that planning and implementing universally designed learning in an early childhood classroom really begins with the curriculum that you're choosing. Not saying that you have to choose a different one, but using that original curriculum, differentiating and being intentional with children and understanding their different sort of learning and development styles and their stages where they're at, and then bringing in those 3 bolded parts of the framework. And then the other one that we want to talk about is that educators and their service providers who work with children are also working together to determine adaptations and modifications to that curriculum for each child. Again, differentiating, being intentional, individualizing, and looking at pushing services into the classroom as opposed to taking children out of the classroom. That way they have modeling through their peers, which is really important, and they're in their environment, which is just another way of them sort of being a part of everything, but also seeing what else is going on, which is very important. And so we're going to move on to looking at the layout of the physical environment, because we have a lot of environmental checklists in early childhood education classrooms. We have one that we use when we do classroom observations for technical assistance for our pre-K programs. And what we're really looking at is how those environments foster encounters, communication, learning, and relationships between the teachers and adults in the classroom and the children, and also children with their peers, because that's another really important connection. So when we look at the environment, we're looking at a well-organized preschool classroom, and that is one that helps children utilize the space efficiently, meaning they have access and understanding of the different areas of the classroom, the materials, how to use them. This also allows educators more time to interact with children, because the less that we're kind of doing managerial things in the classroom, meaning activities are set up, centers are open, materials are there, children can access them easily, gives us more time as adults to interact with those children during the activities. This supports children of all abilities in their independent self-direction and self-reliance, growing those skills, practicing those skills, and solidifying those skills. Again, longer interactions and engagement, which supports longer attention spans in children and understanding of concepts being learned in new and different ways, and then is purposeful and intentional in its design. This is a classroom that you can see differentiated learning centers. There's like an art easel in one area. There's a dramatic play area. It looks like a library area maybe. There's a different area for library and circle time. And they're all sort of delineated by the furniture in the classroom. There's a term that we use in early childhood that is the classroom as the third teacher, because if you do have clearly delineated spaces, using your furniture and your classroom and you're being intentional about setting that up can really give boundaries and directions to children in a visual sort of way, so they can understand more about what the boundaries are, what the expectations are. And so the question then becomes, of course, how do we do this? I have used in my past life in my Head Start experience what I used to call my non-negotiables in the classroom, which were mainly visual supports. Visual supports can really support children's understanding of the day, the classroom experience, the expectations, sort of where things belong with labels on the shelves, where they stand when they line up, because, standing in one spot when it's an open space can be really difficult for a 3 or 4 year old. So we like to give them a lot of guidance and direction and that they can see it visually. It also gives us a great way to sort of walk through reminders, because we have something visually to show them as we're reminding them and redirecting them. So we also want to look at reflecting children and their families in the classroom. We can do this by books in the library. We can do this by having families send in photos and putting images on the walls, displaying children's work and different things around the community that they might recognize. Materials and activities, again, that are easily accessible by children. And you can see in the 2 photos on the right how the shelves are all open. There are a lot of materials that children can very easily access. They're at their level, they're not super heavy, they are labeled with pictures and words to see what they are inside them. The other thing about that is that on the top one, you can also see that there's not like every material that you own in the classroom is out. It's very intentional as to what the activities are, what the learning objectives are, how you set up your classroom. And then through the year, you're going to go through those materials and change them out so they're not all there, which can be very overwhelming. Let's see what else. We talked about clearly delineated play and learning centers, which you can see again at the top in the top photo. And then variable and flexible seating options. I don't have pictures of this, but you can see in the middle on the bottom, there's like there's a bunch of pictures together. In the top right, there's a carpet that has squares in it. Those squares are actually giving children boundaries and giving them their own space to sit at circle, which can become very empowering. And children do tend to take ownership of their own space, but also understanding that children, it's not appropriate for every child to be able to sit at circle for 5 or 10 minutes because developmentally it may not be appropriate for them. So allowing them a choice of maybe sitting at a table nearby where they can still follow along and pay attention, they can still be supervised. Possibly having a wiggle seat might be easier. There's a whole bunch of different variated seating that we have out there. And then materials that support communication and language development. So all of the visuals that you're seeing here do support that. Other materials in the classroom might be puppets, where children are using a puppet and they're telling a story, or they're talking back and forth to each other or with their friends, that sort of thing. They're supporting communication, they're developing their language. Also, play phones. I've seen a lot of like old, non-used and very safe like cell phones, because that's what we're using today in classrooms, and observing a lot of children picking them up and then giving one to a teacher and having a conversation back and forth. And that's just a really good way of supporting that language development and those communications and modeling how to have that conversation. Again, displays of children's work and dictation in the classroom. I think that we find when research tells us when we display children's work in their dictation on the walls, they take a lot of ownership. It becomes their classroom. They're very proud of their work. They want to talk about it. They want everybody to see it. That's a really empowering thing. And the other thing is that when we do that, it also models for other children who may not be here's a great example. My son, when he was in pre-K, never went to the art area. He was very gross motor. He was very block building, but he never went to the art area. And so what happens when you have a child that might be like that is when you're displaying everything, they're like, ooh, and they might get interested. So you're modeling that and giving other children motivation to sort of go to those different areas, experience different things, and practice different skills. And then space and materials that support social emotional learning. There's a lot of visuals there. Your red choice, green choice. There's a couple of other different visuals that are not depicted here. But also we have social stories. We have, a place to make choices for children. One of the things that we talk about a lot that's a really amazing tool to have in a classroom is sort of like an alone space or a calming corner, or there's a whole bunch of different names for it. But essentially, it's a space in the classroom that's very comfy space that is meant for one child, and it is meant for children who might need to be alone or get out of the hustle and bustle of the classroom. Maybe they have, the noise is too loud, sensory issues, that sort of thing. And they can choose to go to this space and be well supervised. So it's in the classroom, everybody can see it. But they can be alone and they can work on their self-regulation and executive functioning skills in that area. There's also some new research that's come out that those areas are really very supportive for multilingual children. We like to call them language shelters. It took me a second to remember that one. It's the same thing. When you have a child who isn't necessarily understanding or speaking the language, it can be very overwhelming and a little bit frustrating. Having them have a place where they can go to sort of regulate themselves, be by themselves for a little bit and sort of reset is a really amazing tool. And then just some questions for consideration when you're designing a welcoming and accessible place for learning for pre-K and 3-year-olds is, who is this environment for? And sometimes we may not know if we're setting up our classroom sort of before we have our children come in. Hopefully we've done our screenings and met our parents and we know what needs we need to meet. But who are you designing the environment for? Which also, a very important note, will change every year because your children are going to be different every year. What do you want to accomplish in your classroom environment? Can all your children access all parts equally? If you have a child that might be in a wheelchair, are there still areas where they can access everything and get around the room and have tables at the right height and that sort of thing? That's really important. How will the space support the curriculum? Curriculums vary in how they sort of do their play and learning. And so it's important to take your curriculum and understand that and build your space with those goals in mind. What are the goals for the children in the classroom environment? A lot of times I've seen classrooms that have like circle in the middle and that becomes sort of like a racetrack, or different things that we want to think about when we're creating for the children in our classroom and what our goals are around that. Is your classroom a place for order or beauty? Is there a cozy and comfortable space where a child can be alone yet supervised? That would be your sort of calming corner. And considering nature and living things in your classroom is a great way to sort of bring in concepts that we're talking about in new and different ways. So we're talking about textures, colors, smells, those sort of things, bringing in like small pebbles to use as counters in the manipulative area, or, branches or boughs to paint with at the art easel. Other branches, boughs, that sort of thing to build with in block area, giving children a chance to sort of manipulate those materials and, touch and smell and that sort of thing. And then also you can see in the picture on the lower left, that is, it might be on the right on your screen actually, that is like living plants and that sort of thing. And that also gives children a great way to sort of have a job to take care of those plants and learn about that sort of thing as well. And then we have a few considerations we pulled together when you're pulling a multi-age classroom together. And one of the things that we wanted to start when we had this conversation was that creating a multi-age or mixed age classroom of 3 and 4-year-olds is really not uncommon. It happens in a lot of our community providers. Our Head Starts do that very often. It's really not uncommon and can be a really positive learning environment. It's also very similar to having like a K-1 classroom or a first and second grade combined classroom. So when we think about it that way, it's something that a lot of us are doing already in our schools. And it's very, very common. So we put together just a bullet point list of some considerations when and if you're bringing or building a multi-age classroom. So you're going to want to be intentionally individualizing and following IEP goals, individualization and understanding scope and sequence of development for each child. And that's going to come in when we look at our MELDs, and Michelle's going to bring us through that in just another slide or two. Understanding that transitions may take a little bit longer and expectations and routines may take longer to teach. A part of that is also understanding children's developmental appropriateness for that. So when we're looking at 3-year-olds, sharing, sort of hitting, biting, those sort of things are very appropriate in development for that age. So it's not necessarily it's a behavior that challenges us. It's not necessarily challenging behavior. It's part of development that we are working on teaching children. So just knowing that those expectations and routines may take a little bit longer, and when we learn our children where they are developmentally, it's a little more understandable. Focusing on children's goals and supports while working closely with support staff. We talked about that earlier. Understanding where all children are on the developmental continuum continuum, and remembering also that the levels of where their actual age are might be a little bit lower developmentally. And the same is true in our 4-year-old pre-K classrooms. We have 4-year-olds who developmentally may fall in a 36 to 39-month-old range. And we have to individualize and differentiate for that as well. Toileting support for 3-year-olds may look a lot different, and especially developmentally delayed 3-year-olds who may be lower on that continuum age-wise or developmental age-wise. They're going to need a lot more toileting support. They may or may not be able to do a lot of it by themselves. And so how do we start that sort of process working with families? A lot of it has to do with sort of teaching them how to, take their bottoms off to go to the bathroom, that sort of thing. They may just not have that developmental growth yet. And then also including regular bathroom breaks in a daily schedule is going to be really important. We don't necessarily always do that for 4-year-olds. Some we do, maybe more at the beginning of the school year, and then we kind of let them, they'll figure it out when they need to go on their own. It's a little bit different with 3-year-olds. And then being mindful of the daily schedule in general. And if you're bringing 3-year-olds in and you have a full day program and they're not coming in for a full day, just being mindful of the schedule of what is going to be most beneficial. So bringing them in for like lunch, rest time in small groups, probably not as beneficial as bringing them in for like a morning meeting or a play and learn centers time. And then also giving consideration for play-based learning program or curriculum, which is very developmentally appropriate for 3 and 4-year-olds. And research tells us that children learn through play. That is their job. And so having that consideration or being mindful of that is really important. One of the things that is really important also is it comes up a lot when children do have a mixed age classroom and they're in the same classroom, same curriculum for 2 years, is whether children will get bored or whether they've already done this, they're not going to want to do it again. The research shows us, and I've actually seen it myself in my own classrooms, that children, they will experience that continuity over the years, which is amazing. Individualization and differentiation, which does change as they grow and develop. And that happens with over the 2 years in their program, and they will grow their skills and abilities in different ways over those 2 years. So children often become experts when they come back for a second year, understanding concepts in new and different ways. And then they also, there's a lot of leadership and autonomy in that because they can support their younger peers. They've already been there. They know the routines, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of good modeling that happens there. Michelle, you're muted. Sorry.
There we go. One good thing to remember when looking at mixed age classrooms is the scope of development that you are going to be having with these children, and how to really take an activity or a concept and really break it down for different levels. And so this is an example in the block area where children might be building houses because you're talking about neighborhoods or apartments or things like that. Whereas that first picture, might be more geared towards where you're going to see 3-year-old or not typically developing, 4-year-olds. So, some simple structures. Whereas, you're typically developing or 4-year-olds, as well as maybe some advanced 3-year-olds, might be able to do the structures that are in the middle, a little bit more complex, and thinking about other ways. So having materials for all children and just understanding that, showing them the expectations and how they can start simple and really scaffold that as they get older and more efficient and knowledgeable about using blocks and fine motor. Also, we included in here is the developmental stages of writing. And so thinking about what you're going to be looking at before children actually are able to write, and how they're holding their pens or markers or crayons, and really seeing that progression, and also understanding the importance of having different types of materials for those children who might need help with different types of grasps. So maybe stubby crayons or thicker crayons, help pencils that are a little bit thicker, pencil grips, things like that, that is really going to help all children in all stages. And then as Marcy was talking about, so the PMELDs, the preschool Maine early learning and development standards, is really from that beginning of 3-year-old up through when they go to kindergarten. Because of some of these children might have development delays, and it's always good to be aware and able and understand that the PMELDs sort of get fed into by the infant toddler development standards. And so that's it's set up very similar. So it can be a continuum, and you can see where children are on the developmental continuum. And it will be indicators earlier on. So the infant toddler is, that 0 through 3 range, and really able to look at if they're not mastering a skill, or if they're not able to do that, then what is something that they can do, and how do you scaffold up to where they are for a typically developing, 4-year-old or something like that. So it is really important to look at the infant toddler MELDs to understand that complete developmental continuum for a child.
I also just want to point out that if you're looking at the continuum, the dark green column, so the third column, is actually the end of pre-K standards. So it's just something to be mindful of, and then which are aligned with the MLRs for kindergarten as well. And then finally, we have some professional development information, because that's always a positive thing. So one of the very important networks we have in our state is Maine Roads to Quality Professional Development Network. And this is the network for all of our early childhood educators across the state. So whether you're, home or family childcare and you're working with infants, or you're a public pre-K teacher and you're working with 4-year-olds, you are registered through Maine Roads to Quality. It is a free registration. What that does is they actually hold the registry for our early educators in Maine, and they do supply a portal to professional development certificates. So you can enter all of your information in there, all of your credentials, and then there is a career at lattice. They level you on different, depending on what your background is. This also holds it in one place. So when you're renewing anything, you can just go in, print it out, super easy. They also offer, and to me, this is one of the most important things, they offer a wide variety of online and virtual trainings at a very low cost. So low cost, meaning they're $20 or $30. They go from 3 weeks to maybe 5 or 6 weeks. They do also offer an online MELDS training and an infant toddler MELDS course. Those are like 30 hours, and those are actually at no cost right now, I believe so. These trainings are great for supporting administrators, educators, and support staff, whether it's ed techs or, special services staff who are in your classrooms. And there are multiple areas. So I did list a couple here, because these ones are very close to what we're talking to today and what we're looking at. Again, these are, I don't know if they're $20 or $30, but they're very, very low cost. So the Foundations of Universal Design is coming up early March. Collaborating with others to support inclusion is a great one. That's coming up at the end of this month. And then creating inclusive preschool classrooms, and you can see the dates on there, preschool settings, that's coming up beginning of April. They're also offered multiple times over the year. So I know that creating inclusive preschool classrooms is also coming up again, I think in September. And then I'm not sure about the other two. I didn't look those up, but they're not just offered once. They're offered multiple times throughout the year. Their calendar is also linked here, and you'll get a link to that as well. And then finally, we worked really hard to put a very overwhelming list of resources and links together for you. Not that we expect you to go and visit all of these links, but if you do looking for support or have questions, I think you'll find a lot of the answers here. So I just want to run through them quickly so you know what they all are and have a little bit of background. So the IRIS modules are modules that were put together. They focus on not just early childhood. They actually go birth to, I want to say maybe grade 12. I'm not sure where they end, but they do have early intervention and early childhood learning modules, setting up expectations, working with children with IEPs, and there's a bunch of other ones listed in there that are really great. Expectations is one of them, challenging behaviors, that sort of thing. Maine Roads to Quality, we talked about this earlier, the Rising Up Achieving a Star Level 3. That link will take you to what a Star Level 3 looks like, what programs have to have. And so that's what that link is. There's a link for the Maine Early Learning Development Standards, infant, toddler, preschool, and the Maine learning results are on this link as well. It takes you to a link to all three of them. Preschool environment checklist. This came from the Boston Public Schools Focus on Threes, which is their 3-year-old program, curriculum program. So they have an environmental checklist that they built out, which is a really good one. We have some toileting resource support on here that we have put out over the years. The Center for Social Emotional Foundations of Early Learning, or the CEFA website, is through Vanderbilt University. They have amazing amount of visual things that you can print off, visual tools, social stories, a lot of social emotional supports for classroom teachers, and a parent website. Their social stories are great because you can open them up and then put your own pictures or words or change things in them to represent the children in your classroom or exactly what you want to teach children. You can also use them for specific children and put their pictures in there, which is kind of cool, or send them home for families. The Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies through the University of Maine is CCIDS. They have a lot of tip sheets for inclusion, social emotional development in early childhood, and then a whole lot more tools. They also have the next one is a link to their visual supports website where they have a lot of visual supports and then a lot of learning and guidance around those. Maine Roads to Quality is on here. This is just the network, the link that will take you to their general page for registration and any other information that you want. The National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations, NCPMI, is also a social emotional framework for early care and education that has a lot of resources in their resource library and is a framework for social emotional support and learning in early classrooms. The Early Education and Career Lattice, we talked about that, so I put that in here. Head Start Performance Standards, we did talk about Head Start a little bit, so I put that in here. Child Care Choices is linked here. And then Early Childhood Investigations website is a website or a place that they offer free virtual webinars. They're always ongoing throughout the year. They're always free. I believe they have archived webinars and recordings, but it's all things early childhood. I think they have one coming up on inclusion, possibly building out environments, and they are generally doing challenging behaviors a lot. And then finally, our contact information is here. And I know that we gave you a ton of information and there's a lot of research and a lot of, learnings and support and guidance around all of the topics that we talked about. They're all pretty big topics, but please feel free to reach out to any of us at any point and we can support you in more resources, guidance, that sort of thing. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I assume I'm going to let Sandy tell us what's next, but I think we're going to open up for questions. If anybody has any questions about anything, not just about our presentation today.
Yes. First of all, I want to thank you for both you and Michelle for that great presentation and all the valuable resources. I saw some on there that I was not aware of. So thank you. There are no questions in the chat, but I want to make sure that we open it up to our Cohort 2 team here to see if there are any questions. Okay, are there any questions from our Cohort 2 participants here on any other topic that we can help you with?
I have a question, Sandy.
Hi, Christine.
Hi. I think that there's been some talk about the conversations around um, uh, the number of um, the limits of time that we were talking about that came up in our last cohort meeting right before winter break.
Are you talking about the guidance that we put out about FAPE in LRE?
I think so. Yes, yes.
Yep. Okay. So
So, so I think that I know I was in our regional group, and there seemed to be some other questions. I didn't know if other regional groups were talking about having a hard time meeting some of those standards, and if those are legal standards, or I don't know if other people are going to chime in.
So maybe if you
Mm,
could be a little more specific about the challenges, we could
mm, Yeah, I
help
think that
support you.
I'm sorry. I'm feeling challenged by challenging myself.
Okay.
Sorry. I think I should leave it at that until I can get more clear on the question.
Okay. Feel free to reach out to us. We want to make sure that if there are questions about that guidance, that we're answering them the best that we can. And if
Sure.
your regional group
Okay.
wants to meet with one of us or both Aaron and I or a team, we can also typically,
Address that. Sure.
Erin usually does her roadshow and visits all the regional groups, and sometimes I
Okay.
tag along. So we would be happy to do
Okay.
that.
Thanks. I think I had one other question that came up. I have a parent who's struggling with getting her child immunized, and with the recent information coming out of CDC. Um, so I think that the clarifying information that we have in the state around what we support, that, we are not funding just any old program that a parent comes up with, that we create the IEP, and these are the services that we're providing. And if we find a program that meets the STAR standard, then we could discuss possibly using that program if it's within our region.
Correct.
But outside of our region, if a parent is like creating a different opportunity for their child, and it's sort of a one-hit wonder for them as a parent, and ultimately they don't have a immunization, we're not obligated to fund something that's sort of outside of that IEP. Even when we start talking about things like we can create an individual service plan, but I haven't heard you talk about proportionate share for pre-K kids.
Okay. You just had a lot of different questions in that one question. So let me try and pick it apart. So you look, it sounds like you had a question about immunization
Right.
requirements, correct?
Eh,
So students have to be registered in their local school district to be to be considered part of early childhood special education, and therefore they need to provide proof of, birth, residency, immunizations, whatever those required documents are, and follow the recommended immunizations
Guidance from the
put
state,
out.
right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, correct. And I know that is a little bit different from what's required with CDS. CDS in the past hasn't required that because they're not a school and so they don't register students. So that might be a difference for some parents.
But they still have, if they're going to a center, they still have childcare center requirements, because I know my CDS partner shared with me the childcare center requirements, which was very helpful.
Yes, and I believe, and I'm glad I have my early learning team here, there are immunization requirements for every licensed childcare and program in the state as well.
Yep.
Okay. And then,
I
okay,
have
immunization. And then there was another part to that question. Oh,
So,
ISP.
mhm.
You
Yeah, so then the
talked through
parent
that.
wants to like create her own co-op, and I can fall back on, well, their parent can create a co-op, but we're not obligated to fund that because that's not a three-starred program, right?
Correct.
So I've been able to respond to that by saying, well, there's a standard that has to be met, and that standard's very well defined through um, our DOE has defined that very clearly, right? Through
Correct.
this, okay. And
Yes,
then
and they still need to be registered in your school as part of
uh
that process.
okay, so even to then qualify for an ISP, they still would have to be registered.
Yes. I'm looking at Erin Fraser nodding her head. Yes.
Yes, registered and enrolled.
Interesting. If the parent is homeschooling, that doesn't qualify them for an ISP?
Homeschoolers don't, well, no, they do get an ISP if they're going to be availing themselves of some of
Special ed
some educate,
services.
yeah, well, or general education services. You aren't required to provide special education services to homeschool children. Um,
No, but
but
you're required to create an ISP, right?
Well, if they are accessing instruction in like if they're accessing some general education instruction, that is when an ISP would be initiated, not just randomly. I mean, you would create an IEP for a child, and if they were in child find, you'd find them eligible and you'd say, this is what we would offer and recommend in an IEP. These are the goals we would work on. And then
Right.
they'd say, no, thank you. And then they say, but we want to go to art class. And so
Mm-hmm.
then you would develop an ISP with accommodations they might need during art class. So that is only if they are accessing general education content within your school setting. Um,
But
oh,
Erin,
by the way,
they can access their special ed services as a homeschooled student, right?
I've never done that as a special ed director. It's not required. Um,
Okay, that's a different law than Massachusetts, so thank you for pointing
yes,
that out to
very,
me.
very, very different from Massachusetts. Very
Thank you.
different.
Okay, thank you.
Like the most different you could be.
Okay, I have to keep putting that hat on because
Yeah.
that's, and then what does Maine do with the federal law around proportionate share for special ed students who are privately placed?
So we provide you with a proportionate share based on your child count of children who are placed in private settings, and that comes through your local entitlement application. And
But
Barb
that doesn't
Taglione does
include special ed students. I mean, that doesn't include homeschooled students in Maine.
no,
Oh, okay. Thank you. And and proportionate share does not yet touch preschool students.
it does.
It does.
Hmm. Wait,
If
Barb,
they're
tell me, because it's given to CDS, right? The
Yeah,
proportionate share.
yeah. I mean, you receive 611 and 619 funds through IDA, and all privately placed students in school approved schools, you're required to set aside a proportionate share of your federal funds, your IDA federal funds. But when you say it's not touching the early childhood pre-K funding model, no, it's not. That's a
it,
federal
yeah.
requirement with your IDA funds.
And we're not counting our preschoolers yet, is what I mean to say.
Well, you will when you take them in. So what happens is right now CDS gets the base for these kiddos. That base will
Mm-hmm.
move to your school district, and
Right.
then you will start counting them as
Right.
or assigning a
Prop share.
proportionate share for
Okay.
every parentally placed child in an approved
Excellent.
private school.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. That's
And
very
just for
helpful.
clarification on the immunizations, the DOE doesn't set that. That's a CDC rule. So the DOE follows the legislation that kind of marked what would be required for the immunizations, but that's not developed in the DOE. It's not a DOE
Okay.
initiative.
Okay. Thank you. So that comes out of the feds, not local.
No, it comes out of the CDC, Maine CDC.
Oh, Maine CDC. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks.
I have an unrelated question. I'm working on budget right now, and our K through 12 ed techs through our collective bargaining agreement are eligible to take a couple courses per year. And I have some of my ed techs in the ECE program that would like to take some coursework. Is that something that will be refundable through the
Lisa,
ECE?
I got your email and I was
Oh.
getting ready to answer it. And I wanted to double check with Barb McGowan because, as you can imagine, we have a lot of questions and I can't keep them all the answers in my head. So I wanted to triple check with her. And so, Barb, do you want to come off mic and share?
Sure, that is something you can charge to 2213. Tuition reimbursement as part of a benefit package, it has to be something that's offered to all of your employees. But if that individual is allocated to 2213, then you certainly can pay for their tuition reimbursement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now I don't need to email you back, right? Okay,
Right.
good. All right, I see that we have a question in the chat from Sarah Mather. With registration, if we have a student transitioning from early intervention, but parent hasn't registered with the school district, should we delay moving forward until they have registered? Typically, what you would want is to have that child all registered and ready so that when the IEP date, the child's third birthday starts, that IEP starts on their third birthday, that they're ready to go. And I don't know if you want to come off mic, Sarah, and if there's any specifics to
Yeah,
this situation.
I think registration has been trickier for a lot of our families, just because with CDS, if they've had, older kids, they're not used to it, and they're just not in person with early intervention. So I'm not able to kind of get them to a school. We've been trying to mitigate that by having our IEP meetings at schools, and asking them to, bring your birth certificate, bring proof of residency. If this IEP meeting ends by the team determining, this, then you can go to the front office. Um, but do they then not need to be registered for us to do initial evaluations, etc.?
Correct. You do not need to register them until they have an IEP.
Okay. And then if the parent is delayed in doing that, would we do best interest in the child? And or is that going to be up to our principals, to our administration? I think more so on like if we're being audited and don't have services starting on a third birthday, but can show that we've tried to get that registration done, etc. Um,
I mean, I think part of it is you have to register them so that they are in NEO.
yeah.
And I know that we do a child count now through what you submit to Jennifer and her team that gets put through. Eventually, as our state starts to take this on, it probably won't be through a spreadsheet anymore. It will be relying on that registration process and into NEO. So we understand that this is a different process for parents, but it's very similar to when parents are registering for kindergarten.
Mhm.
And so I think it's just getting that information out as soon as you can, explaining that expectation.
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, it's super understandable. It just helps me prioritize to put a little more attention on that and getting a process in place. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think you'll see it mitigate throughout the year because you will, as soon as families are connecting with you with their referral, you can add that into your kind of onboarding and information that when you're talking to them.
That's great. Thanks.
Mhm. Any other questions? Okay, well, we want to thank you for your time today. We'll end a few minutes early. Have a great evening and thank you.